watching the Jennylyn show, and I am Jennylyn Gleave, your host. And tonight, my guest is Dr. Seth Shostak, and I am sure he is no stranger to you, but tonight is my privilege to ask him the question. Seth, thank you so much.
Jennylyn, it's truly a pleasure to be here. It is.
So you are the senior astronomer at the Seti Institute. Do you want to tell me or share with my viewers what the Seti Institute is all about?
Sure. SETI, S-E-T-I. It's just an acronym.
Okay.
And it just stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So if you strip away all the Latin there, what it really means is looking for proof that there's not only just life in space, but even intelligent life in space. And I have to say that the SETI Institute does more than that. We also look for life that might not be so intelligent.
Okay.
So we do all kinds of research on the question of life elsewhere.
How long have you been working? How long have you been doing this?
Well, I've been at the SETI Institute for longer than any other job I've had, Jennylyn. I came there, I think, in 1991, so it's a long time. It's more than 2 decades. It's a long time.
1991. So tell me, during that time, how many aliens?
Actually, we haven't found any yet.
Yeah.
Mind you, that for various reasons, I don't consider that discouraging. Had we found, a signal that would tell us they're there, of course you would have read about that in the papers. I mean, that would be enormously big news. So, in a sense, you could answer your own question in terms of how many aliens we found. We haven't found any. But that could change. It could change tomorrow, it could change next week, it could change, I think it'll change in the next 24 years, but nobody can be sure.
Why do you think so? What do you think will change?
Well, the reason I think so is simply looking at the speed at which we're doing the experiment, right? I mean, you're pointing big antennas at nearby star systems, hoping that some of them have planets that might be inhabited. And not just inhabited by, microbes or jellyfish or trilobites or dinosaurs or anything like that, but inhabited by critters that are at least as clever as we are here on Earth and that have, figured out radio. They're broadcasting radar, television, FM radio, whatever they're doing. And those signals, of course, some of them will come right off their planet and that we might pick them up. Now, if you try and guess when are we going to hear them, you have to make some estimate, which is a good word for guess, as to how many are out there that are broadcasting right now in our galaxy. And we don't know the answer to that. But if there are, at least a few thousand, then the chances are that we might find one of them in the next 24 years.
Wow. So throughout my lifetime, people have reported pastures with patterns that they think are consistent with ships that they've found, and you've heard these stories.
Yes.
How do you explain them?
I hear them every day. Some woman called up today. She wants to send me some photos because she saw something last night. That happens just about every day. People see things. Roughly 1 out of 3 people in the United States, in fact, believes that the aliens aren't just out there. Obviously, I think that. But they're also here. They're in their spacecraft, they're in their alien saucers, whatever they're piloting these days.
Orbiting our universe.
Well, orbiting our planet. That's the point, that they're buzzing the countryside. That you might look up and see one. Or they may haul you out of your home for experiments your mom wouldn't appreciate. Yes. I mean, they call up about that. So a lot of people think this is true. Very few scientists are convinced by this because the evidence is not very good. It's mostly, if you will, witness testimony. In other words, you bring in a pilot and they were flying their plane, military pilots, sometimes astronauts, and they saw something they didn't understand. They said it was something that was moving too fast to be an airplane, or it had funny lights or whatever. And so that's the evidence that's presented for us being visited. But unfortunately, that's not very good. I mean, if it were to actually land somewhere, and you could really look at it or get a piece off of it or take close-up photos, that would be much more convincing.
So how do you explain to them what they've seen and what the photographs are of?
Well, in the case of photographs, sometimes you can figure it out. Photography happens to be a hobby of mine, so I've had a lot of experience with things that can go wrong with photography. And so very often I can see what's happening, that it's what's called total, internal reflection in the camera. If they're shooting a picture at night and there's a street lamp over in the corner of the frame, then that'll bounce around the optics or even the body of the camera and make, little ghost images on the film or the CCD, whatever kind of camera it is. And those are easy to recognize. So sometimes you can tell. Very often you can't tell. I mean, it's just some sort of moving thing right? And they're holding a video camera sort of steady, but not really, trying to, zoom in on it, and you can't tell what it is. So while you can't say, I can't be sure that's not the Klingons coming to visit Milpitas, what you can say is that, I don't have enough information here to be sure that, what it is. I mean, I don't know. But just because you don't know doesn't mean it's aliens.
I think I've seen one. I mean, when I was a little girl growing up in South America, I saw something that to this day I try to explain in my mind what I had seen.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of people like that. I mean, look at it this way. The San Francisco Police Department solves roughly 60% of the homicides. Okay, if they're as good as the average in the country.
Right.
So a little over half of them they actually figure out who did it, and in every case it's a human who's committed murder against another human.
Right.
But what about the 40% they can't solve or don't solve? What are you going to say? You say, well, I don't know, Bob. They didn't find out who did these, so I wonder whether it wasn't aliens. Well, maybe it is aliens, but that wouldn't be, the first thing you'd think of. So when people look up in the sky and they see something they don't know what it is, and that happens a lot, to jump to the conclusion that it's alien spacecraft that's a big step.
Well, when I first came to America, I saw this show that it was actually on a talk show, and I think it was a Sally Jesse Raphael show. Mm-hmm. And there were three gentlemen who claimed they had gone to Colombia fishing. And they were out in this fishing boat on a lonely night, like during midnight in Colombia, somewhere really quiet. And suddenly this huge light appeared above their boat. And they claimed they were hypnotized. And there were, I think, 3 or 4 hours that were unaccounted for in their life. And when they found themselves again, they had different symptoms. One kept hearing a beeping noise in his head, and I think he was taken into the hospital, and they found some device implanted in his leg, which he actually showed on the television show. And they are convinced that they were abducted by aliens, and they did some sort of investigative study on them. Were these men crazy? I mean, what do you think about this?
Well, I think that there are two possibilities. One is that it's a hoax, right? And they sort of made up this story. Now, that occasionally happens. Some of the reports are hoaxes. You become famous. You're on television, you're in the news, and maybe you can start a new career. So, I mean, in the case of Travis Walton, he just said one day, I want to get abducted. Within the week he had been abducted, and they made a TV series, a movie out of it. I mean, so it may be a career choice in some cases. But I think that that's less likely than door number two. Door number two, I think, would be that indeed something happened to them.
They were convincing.
Yes, no, I don't think they were lying. The people who call me every day, as I say, I've never heard one where I thought they were lying. I mean, of course I don't know, but they all sounded very sincere. So I suspect that these guys are sincere. But you have to ask yourself, if you were, some aliens living on a planet 500 light years away, would you say, what we really ought to do? We ought to get into this spacecraft that can go faster than anything those Earthlings can make. This incredibly expensive, fast spacecraft, go down to that blue planet and shine light in the eyes of some Colombian fishermen. I mean, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? I mean, I don't know.
Maybe they don't even know who they are.
Well, yeah, that's right. We won't even know that they're Colombian fishermen.
Right. They're just wandering around, and they're in a lonely area, so they're a good target, because a lot of the people...
Right. We'll just zap them so that they lose 3 hours of time, because, hey... Well, I mean, I don't know about the motivation. I don't know what motivates aliens. So maybe they find that fun. Maybe they're teenagers. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, a lot of people make very similar reports. Bright lights. I think that's due to Steven Spielberg. In E.T., the movie E.T., suddenly the aliens had bright lights. They'd never had bright lights before. Suddenly they became enlightened in some way. Okay, so, they have bright lights, and then there's this idea that they've lost track of time. That's very common. Even the earliest, yes. So they're picking up on all the sort of, if you will, iconic occurrences that take place from people who have claimed to have been, encountering aliens, that sort of thing. So, the story is very familiar, but if they had only not just had the bright lights, but, gotten an ashtray from the UFO or a tail light or something like that, that'd make it a lot more convincing.
Well, I think in this case the guy had something in his leg, but I don't want to spend all my time with you, Todd.
People have taken things out of other people's arms, legs. Aliens, for some reason, are putting all sorts of things. If what you took out looked like, had the electronics of a cell phone in it, I would say that's pretty convincing. But if it's just a little bit of a rock, which it usually is, you get that all the time by falling down.
So throughout your career, what has been the experience that has left you wondering as an astronomer that you're really questioning, could it be?
Well, here's the thing. I've never seen anything that I thought was a UFO that convinced me for very long. I mean, I did see one in Los Angeles once driving down the 405 freeway, I have to say. But it turned out to be the Goodyear blimp. And that turns out to have been made by humans, not by aliens. But, I mean, I'm nonetheless convinced that there's intelligent life out there. That's a different thing. And the reason I am is not because we found it, because we haven't. We haven't found any life, intelligent or dumb. We haven't found even dumb life in space. But there are a whole bunch of places where you could have it. Obviously Mars, people talk about Mars. But there are moons of Jupiter and Saturn that have, liquids, in most cases water, liquid water. So if you have liquid water sitting around for billions of years, something may cook up. That's one thing. But the other thing is that we now know that our galaxy has about 1 trillion planets.
Wow.
Now that's a big number, 1 trillion with a T.
Huge.
Yeah, but that's only our galaxy. We can see 100 billion other galaxies. So, multiply that number by 100 billion. It's really a big number. Now, we don't know, most of those planets are pretty uninteresting. They're like Mercury or Neptune or whatever. Okay, but the best estimates from recent research sort of suggest that maybe 1 in 5, and maybe it's only 1 in 10, but so what? 1 in 10, let's say, of those planets is actually the kind, sort of like the Earth, where you have an atmosphere and oceans and maybe where life could cook up. Even so, that means 100 billion cousins of Earth in our galaxy, alone in our galaxy. So to think that this is the only one where there's something nifty going on, namely us, or something like us, that's pretty self-centered. And as you get older, you realize if you're too self-centered, you're, not well regarded.
That can be true. So, why did you choose to become an astronomer?
Oh, I was just interested in the stars as a kid. And I also went to a lot of cheesy sci-fi films.
Aha. So that's kind of, how does one become an astronomer?
Well, there's no secret to it. I mean, if you're interested in astronomy, of course, in high school there's not much you do. You just take some science courses. And when you get to college, actually, you could take an astronomy course. You could make it your major at many schools. But even if you didn't, if you studied physics, for example, or mathematics, or geology, in fact, if you're doing planetary science, so you go in the direction of those fields. And then probably, if you want a real job in astronomy, you have to go to graduate school. Because if you don't have an advanced degree, it's very hard to get a job these days. Astronomy, doesn't make money. It's basic research, so there aren't a zillion jobs.
Because I was going to say, I was going to ask you, besides research, what else happens at the Seti Institute?
Well, in fact, it's mostly research, and mostly non-SETI kind of research, looking at Mars and these moons of the outer solar system. But there's also other activity in that we do education and outreach. We certainly do that. We've made materials for high schools and middle schools, and even some elementary school, I believe, materials in which we try and hook kids, because kids are interested in aliens. Go into a school and ask any class, hey, you kids think there are aliens out there? And all the hands go up. Of course they do. They've seen, aliens on television since they were born. So of course they believe in them. And so you use that as a hook to teach them some astronomy, some biology, some geology, stuff like that. So it's a great field. Even if we don't find the aliens for a while, at least we can get kids interested in science.
So is it a popular career path? Do you have a lot of people choosing this as a career? Because most people are driven by money. Yeah. And a lot of times people are choosing their careers. A lot of times it's associated with income.
A lot of them are, but in good economic times, then earning money is a little less compelling to some. I mean, if you talk to young people, my impression is that many of them are quite idealistic. They want to do something to help the world, right? That's what you're laughing because you're older now and you realize helping the world is really hard, but still, it's a good thing that people want to help the world because otherwise nobody ever would help the world. Well, okay, helping the world doesn't necessarily mean that you get an income, right? So it's more than just about the money. In the case of astronomy, they go into it because they just find it interesting. And yes, there aren't a lot of jobs, but if you find it interesting, it certainly doesn't hurt. to study a little astronomy.
Have you ever regretted choosing this career path?
Well, I was interested in many, many things, Jennylyn, and I always wonder, what if I followed some of the other things I was interested in, which I have to say, in some ways I have done, because I've had many jobs.
So if there's a young person out there who's interested in this field, do you have programs where they're allowed to come in and be an intern and find out if this is something they want to pursue? How does that work?
Yeah, it works not as well as it should, to be honest, because the Seti Institute doesn't have a whole lot of money. It's always a money problem, which isn't very interesting, but it is the fact that it's hard to support the interns. I mean, even if they come in and say, I'll work for free all summer, right? We do have a summer program, but that's with NASA money to bring in undergraduates at schools around the country.
Right.
And we get, 25 or so of these undergraduates at the Institute, and they spend the summer working with various scientists. And that's a great thing. That's a great thing. Otherwise, it's hard to do because there's so few people there that they don't have, and that just means everybody's very busy, and they don't pay attention enough to the interns, Oh, yeah, the intern, gee, I went on vacation, forgot about him, that kind of thing. I mean, she's been lost all summer because you weren't here to talk to her, that kind of thing. So it's something we ought to do more of.
Have you ever wanted to go to the moon?
Yeah, I wanted to go to the moon. When I was a kid, I definitely wanted to go to the moon. And in fact, I would occasionally go to the Hayden Planetarium, as it was called, in New York when I was a kid. And for a while, they were giving out tickets to be on the first rocket to the moon. And I believed it was a publicity stunt. But I didn't know that. I was a kid. I thought it was for real. And I thought it was for real until I was about, 34 or something.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, what's prevented you from going?
Huh?
I mean, you are the senior astronomer here at the Seti Institute. Why haven't you gone?
Why haven't I gone to the moon? They don't want to send a senior astronomer from the Seti Institute to the moon. They're not sending anybody to the moon these days. I was just at a conference in L.A., in fact, 2 of them,
right,
in which there were the Apollo astronauts, right? These guys are. And you can go talk to them, very interesting people. But they're essentially all pilots, with very few exceptions. They were all pilots in the early days. The people who've gone to the moon were, almost without exception, pilots. Because their job was to get this piece of hardware down onto the moon. So you wanted a pilot. You could say, hey, I'd like to send an astronomer or a planetary geologist. They did send one geologist, Jack Schmidt, but that was at the end of the program. In general, they were not scientists. Today, if you sent people to the moon, you would send scientists. But nobody's going to the moon right now.
Why? Is it because of money again?
Mostly money. Yeah, it's mostly money. There are plenty of programs to go to the moon. There are people who want to go to the moon and mine it. There are people who want to go to the moon and colonize it. There are people who want to go to the moon and just use it as a base for going elsewhere. But all of it requires, pretty big rockets. And NASA doesn't have big rockets right now. People like Elon Musk might get to the moon faster than NASA will. So it's it's a question of money. But there are a lot of countries interested in going to the moon, so I think we will go back to the moon fairly soon.
Why is it they choose the moon all the time? Is that the one that's most inhabitable, or is it because it's the closest one to us?
Yeah, it's because it's closest. The moon is not, it's not great for habitation. There's no air.
Right.
There's no liquid water. The temperatures in the day are 200 and something, and at night they're minus 200 and something. I mean, it's not as nice as the South Bay, for example. So, going to the moon, you have to have protection. You have to have a suit. You have to have maybe you build a base, you're underground all the time, whatever. But the real advantage of the moon, and this is something that the Earth has, that a lot of planets don't have, is a big moon very nearby. It's only 250,000 miles. I have that on my Honda, so it's not really very far.
Yeah, because I know since I was a little girl, it's the one planet we continue to visit. So I was wondering if what the reason was behind that, since there's so many others. Why is it that we continually go there? Why haven't we tried some of the others?
Well, it is honestly, it's just distance. I mean, you go to Mars, and a lot of people want to go to Mars. It might be a lot more interesting than the moon, and there might be some life down there in the dirt.
I thought it was too hot to go there. I thought it's so hot it would destroy any.
No, Venus is hot. Mars is not so hot.
Okay.
Mars is mostly cold, in fact. Average daytime temperatures on Venus might be minus 30, minus 50. Depends on the day. Depends on where you are. But Mars still would be more interesting in many ways. The problem with Mars is it's more than 100 times farther than the moon. It takes longer to get there. And while you're en route, the sun may have a little bit of a storm. It may burp. And when it does that, you get all this dangerous radiation going through the ship, and you have to protect the crew from that. Otherwise, they all get cancer right away. So you have to do things that you don't have to do going to the moon, because going to the moon is so quick that you don't have to worry about these things.
And lately, you notice how our weather patterns have changed tremendously. Do you think is it related to any of that that you're finding out?
I don't think so. There are some people who think that climate change, which is clearly happening. I mean, the temperatures are going up.
Yeah, it's strange. Look at today.
Well, went down a little bit today. But yes, climate change, there are people who think it's just natural, it's not humanity's fault, it's because the sun fluctuates and goes up and down. And it's true, the sun does fluctuate. Every 11 years it goes through a cycle and so forth. I mean, that's well known. But the idea that the sun is causing this, it doesn't seem to be very well supported by the data. In fact, if you look at the data, the sun's influence is very small. Much bigger influence comes from all the SUVs and sports cars on the highway and the power plants and all that. So, yeah, the sun doesn't do it, and the moon certainly doesn't do it.
If money wasn't an issue, what would you like to see happen at the Institute?
Well, if money was, well, I mean, I would like to see some of our research programs actually get enough money to do more things. It's not just a matter of doing more, it's just doing the minimum that would allow you a good chance of finding something.
Yeah.
Because our Seti experiments, you know, we're looking for ET. That would be extraordinarily interesting. The whole world would be interested to know that we're not the only kids on the block, that there are other kids and they're smarter than we are, because if you find them, they probably are. But, you know, the number of people that are involved in doing that at the Institute is like five people. So, you know, the local McDonald's has more people than that. I mean, it's a very, very small project. So with a little bit of money, you could ramp up the project to a level where you really could check out lots and lots of star systems and maybe find ET, as I say, in a couple of dozen years.
Is it national? Is it a national company, or is it just a local
Well,
California-based company?
It's a non-profit, and it's
Okay.
here. Some of our scientists are elsewhere if they're doing work, and they can do it, you know, at some home institution, some university somewhere. Some of them are at NASA Ames Research Center. But SETI is an international endeavor, except that there are very few people doing it. Almost all the other people doing SETI are in the Bay Area, but on the other side of the Bay in Berkeley. And there's a program at Harvard, and
Wow.
that's it. There's also a program in Italy. But if you add all the people whose business cards say, I'm looking for, you know, intelligent life in the universe, the total number of people in the world might be maybe a dozen, something like that.
Well, if you need money to find, maybe they're out there, but you're just not doing the right research because you're limited because of funding.
Well, that's what we think, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, think of how many people would have a business card that says sells insurance. That would be more than a dozen worldwide.
Well, the thing is, maybe these people are seeing aliens, but you guys don't have the money to afford you the equipment and the research to identify what they're seeing. Because you get so many reports of these sightings from all over the world, and I'm fascinated with it. And
Yep.
as a younger girl, I followed a lot of what people said they see, and I see a common thread. And you can't always explain what they're seeing. So obviously, there's something out there that you aren't finding because you don't have the right tools, methods, whatever, to find it. Is that possible?
Well, of course it's possible, yes. But now, mind you, you're speaking here more of the UFO phenomenon. We're not looking for aliens that are here. We're looking for aliens that might be hundreds of light years away. And by the way, a light year is pretty far. A light year is 6 trillion miles. So these are hundreds of times that. They're very far away, so they're not buzzing the countryside. But even the UFO phenomenon is not looked at very carefully either, and they don't. I'm no expert on what they do, but there are organizations who are trying to investigate these reports. MUFON is best known, Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. And I don't think, I really don't know, but I don't think they have a lot of money either.
So is it fair to say that it's very possible that there's some life form out there that's now and then visits? We just haven't been able to identify them
Could be.
through your institution?
Well, our institution doesn't look at the visitors,
Oh, okay.
that thing. I mean, we don't do that. But, I mean, it's certainly possible. It doesn't violate physics to go visit somebody. It's just hard. I mean, you know, our best rockets go like 7, 8 miles a second, not an hour, 7 or 8 miles a second. That's pretty fast, and that's great if you're going up to, you know, San Francisco for the afternoon or something. That would be great. You'd get there in, you know, 4 or 5 seconds. But if you're going to the stars where the aliens might be, the nearest star at that speed would take you about 75,000 years. So that's a long trip. Now, you can say the aliens may have faster rockets, maybe they do, but it's very hard to go from one star system to another. In Star Trek and other science fiction, they make it look very easy. because it's, after all, fiction.
It's massive, the universe, isn't it?
It's
I mean, when
massive,
I listen
yeah.
to you, I'm thinking, gosh, we can't even begin to comprehend what could be amongst us here.
Well, it's true. Although we've done a pretty good job of inventorying, making an inventory of the universe, we sort of know what's out there, except we don't understand very much of it. I mean, it turns out that if you add up all the mass energy of the universe, because mass and energy are the same, really, E equals mc squared. Mass can be turned into energy. Look at an atomic bomb.
Right.
Turns mass into energy. And the other way around, actually, you can turn energy into mass. But having said that, you can say, okay, how much of this stuff do we understand? And in the universe, about 4 or 5% of it is the kind of ordinary mass like us and everything that we deal with every day. And about 25% of it is something called dark matter, which we don't know what that is yet. It's probably some sort of elementary particle, but we don't know. And then all the rest, which is by far the majority, is something called dark energy. And we have no idea what that is. So, in a way, we know where the galaxies are, we know where the stars are, that kind of thing. You can just look and measure it. But we still don't know some very important things about the universe. There's still plenty of things to learn, plenty of secrets.
Well, I guess sometimes some things are better left where they are, right?
Well, I wouldn't agree with that, Jennylyn. Why would you wouldn't you rather know rather than say, well, I just don't want to know?
Well, they're not hurting us. How would it benefit us to know?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about knowing. If you're talking about understanding the universe, it always benefits to know.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about that.
You're talking about the aliens.
About other life forms
Oh.
that might be sharing this.
Well, suppose our big antennas, picked up some signal coming from a star system 1,000 light years away. If you could figure out what they were saying, it might be interesting. I mean, that might be like, giving Neanderthals, your book collection. It might improve their lives. You'd have to teach them how to read, but, So, I mean, there's always that possibility. I don't know if it's very realistic, but I think that just philosophically, to know that somebody's out there, I think that would be very interesting. Wouldn't you rather know? I mean,
yeah,
if you
we need more friends. We don't have enough on this planet,
friends.
right?
I mean, they're far away. You're not going to be able to converse with them very easily.
Yeah.
But just knowing that, this isn't the only place. I mean, if you had taken the Mayans, I don't know, 700 years ago, and said, actually, you see the waters here down at the beach. Well, if you go over those waters, there are all sorts of other societies on the other side. Does that interest you? And I think some of them, they would say, oh, that's very interesting. What do you know about them?
Well, I think that it's fascinating what you're doing over at your institute. And I wanted to ask you, what's the thing that's impressed you the most while you've been in this field?
I think the most impressive thing to me has been how quickly our knowledge of the universe has changed. I mean, when I joined the Seti Institute, nobody knew whether there were planets out there around other stars. I mean, you kind of assume there were. It seemed reasonable, but you can assume a lot of stuff and it turns out to be wrong, right?
Right.
So, in this case, I mean, when I was a kid, again, at the Hayden Planetarium, half the time they would tell you, we're probably the only group of planets in the entire galaxy. They would tell you that. And now it turns out that almost every star has planets. So I think that, plus a lot of investigation into how life works and maybe how life got started. Those are interesting questions. We know a lot more about them now than we did even 20 years ago.
Thank you so much. The time always goes by when I'm becoming smarter, when I'm being educated on camera. This was a great answers, because so many people I know are interested, believe that they're aliens, that are worried because the last eclipse was so red. But you have made it sound like all we found out is that we've got more planets, and we don't really need to worry. There are no aliens. So if you're someone who's interested in this field, hopefully Seth has answered the questions you may have regarding becoming an astronomer. It sounds like a fascinating field. So contact Seth at the Institute if you're someone who is interested with more questions, or if you've seen an alien. Seth, thank you so very much. I've really enjoyed learning more about your field and sharing it with my viewers.
Thank you, Jennylyn.
And see you next time. Thank you.